If nothing changes from the PTR to the launch of Vessel of Hatred, then the Spirit Wave Necromancer will 100% be the strongest build the Necromancer has to offer. So I'm here to show you my take on the build, and let's not waste any time. Let's get into it. So as always, a couple quick caveats before we get into the nitty gritty of the build. Gameplay above, you'll see, is a speed farm 90 on the PTR. Two things with this is, one, it was using the air perdition, and the air perdition was bugged on the PTR, so it was giving us a 200% damage multiplier that shouldn't exist. So it was like 3 times the damage that it should be, but the build wasn't fully figured out. It wasn't fully min-maxed by any means, so I do think the damage will be somewhat comparable. Obviously not quite as much, but it'll still be very, very good. And I do think this thing will have absolutely zero problem with pit level 100s. But two, I want to quickly say, as with this build and any other build that we post over the next upcoming weeks, obviously a lot of this stuff is subject to change. However, if it does change, I will be updating those D4 planners in the link below, so stay tuned for that. But I don't think there's any intentions to nerf the setup. There's nothing that this is abusing. I don't see them nerfing the blood orb generation because that would inherently affect blood builds. The only potential nerf I could possibly see would be a nerf in the damage of the Blood Arson Curious Bone Spirits in a favor of manually casting Bone Spirit. Those would do more damage, but I don't see them doing that either, but we'll see. Now, the Spirit Wave Necromancer isn't necessarily by any means a new build. It has actually been around in Season 5. However, there's some new tech coming in Vessel of Hatred that really takes this build to the next level. And one of those pieces is the new mythic unique helmet coming to the game called Air of Perdition. This gives a 60% damage multiplier to a helmet slot, which is sort of unheard of for armor slots. And fully GA, fully masterwork, you can get this bad boy up to +7 core skills. And why that's good, for some reason, even though it's on this part of the Necromancer tree, Bone Spirit is in fact still a core skill. So +7 core skills affects Bone Spirit. Another big change for this particular setup was the Supreme Blood Wave buff. Instead of leaving behind 3 orbs, like it does currently on live, it now does +6 orbs. So of course that combined with the tidal aspect, which makes Blood Wave fire 2 additional waves, you're gonna get 18 blood orbs per cast of Supreme Blood Wave. So obviously nutty orb generation. And then lastly, we're getting a new temper in Vessel of Hatred, which will give us a up to 88% chance for Bone Spirit to deal double damage, assuming we get it fully masterworked on both our weapon and our offhand. On top of all of that, there's a new Bone Spirit aspect coming in Vessel of Hatred called the Phasing Poltergeist aspect, which says when Bone Spirit explodes, it spawns 3 spirits that seek nearby enemies and deal up to 40% of its damage. And this effect can only occur once per cast. So every single time we auto-consume these blood orbs and generate a free Bone Spirit, when that Bone Spirit explodes, 3 smaller spirits will explode and deal damage to targets around. And because we're buffing Bone Spirit so heavily, and the Bone Spirit crit damage so heavily, this makes the value of this aspect go up a lot. Plus, mobs will be pixeled. Pixeled is a term in ARPGs for mobs being centered in one tiny position, and that's what Corpse Tendrils does. But because we do this so effectively, those 3 spirits will do massive amounts of AoE damage. So I actually think that we'll be doing way better AoE damage than even in the gameplay above at the start of the video. But let's get into the nitty gritty of how all of this works together, starting with the skill tree. First up, we're going to put 1 point into hemorrhage and the other point into enhanced hemorrhage. But you'll notice I don't even put it on my bar. And again, we just had to put 2 points into this part of the tree to unlock the next core section of the tree. I hate using basic attacks in any Diablo game ever, and I think that this is a waste of 2 points, but we have to get to the next part of the tree. Moving on to the core section, we're going to put only 1 point in the Blood Lance. We don't actually want to scale Blood Lance levels. Now it's getting up to 21 because we have core plus core skills to so many parts of our gear. So it's going to look like we're scaling Blood Lance, but we're not. Blood Lance actually doesn't really do much damage here. So just 1 point in the Blood Lance, 1 point into Enhanced Blood Lance, which says after casting Blood Lance 8 times, your next Blood Lance is a guaranteed overpower and it spawns a Blood Orb. That Blood Orb is important, so don't ignore that. And we're scaling 100% attack speed, so we're going to cast 8 lances as fast as we can. And that once per every 8 casts, free Blood Orb is just juicy for this build. And last, while at least 2 targets or bosses are affected by Blood Lance, you gain 50% increased attack speed, and Blood Lance essence cost is reduced by 3, which is great because we're literally non-stop spamming the skill. So we'd like its essence cost to be lowered as much as possible so we don't ever have to worry about essence regeneration. And the reason we're not picking supernatural, which we would in pretty much any other Bloodlance build, is because we're not scaling overpower whatsoever here. And again, we're not scaling our Bloodlance damage at all. So that 15% additional attack speed helps us reach that 100% attack speed cap way easier. On top of that, in the core section, we're going to put 1 point in the Blight, 1 point to Enhanced Blight, and then 1 point into Supernatural Blight, all for Supernatural Blight. It's a 20% damage multiplier. For those mobs or bosses that are just that little bit extra tanky, it's just free 20% multi. Why not? We've got the points to do it. Then we'll put 3 points into Unliving Energy, increasing our Max Essence by 9. Max Essence actually does have value in this build because the damage of Bone Spirit scales with the maximum essence pool, and we'll touch more on that when we get to talking about Bone Spirit. Coming down to the next part of the tree, we're only put 1 point in the Blood Mist, although Enhanced Blood Mist has value because lances will overpower every once in a while. I don't like putting any points into anything but the base rune of Blood Mist. Again, I never let Blood Mist go for its full duration. I only pop into it and then immediately hit the button again, pop right back out. I don't think there's any value in wasting any more points in the Blood Mist. We'll put 3 points into Titan's Fall. While fortified, you deal 18% increased damage to elites. We're going to be fortified 100% of the time. We're putting 2 points in the Necrotic Fortitude. Bloodlance has a 50% lucky hit coefficient, which is better than pretty much every other core skill. This is something you can play with, but I found that only 2 points was more than enough because of how many times we hit per second in this build. Moving down to the next section, we're going to go 3 points in the Death Embrace, 6% more damage to enemies that are close to you, and 6% less damage taken for enemies close to you. Against bosses, we're pretty much going to be standing in close range. Against everything else, though, it doesn't really matter. We're putting 3 points in Amplified Damage, which will give us 12% damage on its own, but we're actually putting Amplified Damage on our necklace. So we're going to get 24% increased damage to cursed enemies, and everything's going to be cursed because of wearing the curse aura on our boots. Putting 1 point into Decrepify. Decrepify not only gives us 20% less damage taken from enemies, but a chance for enemies to be stunned and a chance to reduce the cooldown of one of our big cooldowns, in this instance Blood Wave, every single time we hit. And we are scaling a bit of lucky hit chance in this build, so that is just going to be flat good. Putting 3 points into Precision Decay, again scaling lucky. Lucky is good in this setup. Moving down to the Coarse Macabre section of the tree, we're going to put 1 point in the Gruesome Meddling just to unlock these two, but 1 point in the Transfusion. This is only once every 2 seconds, but with the sheer amount of blood lances going out, you will be able to proc this pretty easily. But again, that is just a chance to get another Blood Orb, which is just good. More Blood Orbs means more Bone Spirits flying out. And then 1 point into Drain Vitality. Lucky hit. Hitting enemies has a chance to fortify you for 2.5% of your max health. And Bloodlance, again, attacks super duper fast, and we are reaching that 100% attack speed cap, so this thing's going to be firing off like crazy and keeping us perma fortified. We're also going to make full use of Corpse Tendrils with Blighted Corpse Tendrils. This says Corpse Tendrils has a 30% chance to drop a Blood Orb when damaging enemies. And again, more Blood Orbs is more Bone Spirits, and we're going to actually increase the AoE of Corpse Tendrils by 116% between our gloves and our boots. So that means more enemies are going to get hit by Corpse Tendrils, which means more chances to get more Blood Orbs every single time we use Corpse Tendrils, and Corpse Tendrils will be coming off cooldown pretty quick because of Decrepify. But on top of that, Corpse Tendrils is great for pixeling enemies into one location, because Blood Wave, is about yay big. You want to make sure everything gets hit by that Blood Wave, and Corpse Tendrils has really good synergy with that. We're going to put every point we possibly can into Bone Spirit. Now, Bone Spirit consumes all of your essence to deal 400% increased damage to all enemies and surrounding enemies. Damage is increased by 4% for each point of essence spent casting Bone Spirit. Now, with this particular setup, it's not even going to be on our bar, right? We don't have Bone Spirit on our bar. We're never going to be manually casting Bone Spirit, so that damage increase for essence spent, we're basically never going to get the effect of, but there's still value in having max essence, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Same thing with Enhanced Bone Spirit. If Enhanced Bone Spirit critically strikes, the cooldown is reduced. We're never manually casting Bone Spirit, so this effect will also never trigger. And because we're never manually casting it, Dreadful Bone Spirit is not a good choice. We're going to use Ghastly Bone Spirit to get the Bone Spirit chance. Bone Spirit crit chance up by 10%. We're also going to be using Compound Fracture. After critically striking 10 times with the Bone Skill, your Bone Skills deal 50% increased damage for 5 seconds. You'd be surprised that this is actually fairly easy to keep up, especially when combined with the Bone Spirit, the new Poltergeist, which lets us get additional Bone Spirits. We're also going to be using Evolution. Your Bone Skills deal 45% increased damage, critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. Now, you're going to notice a trend as we go through the gearing section. We're scaling loads and loads of critical strike damage, because these critical strike damage multipliers are just insane when they all pop off. We're also scaling Evolution with our Amulet, trying to get a fully masterwork evolution passive is super strong. And the way we're making vulnerable enemies is through our ring. We're going to get a lucky hit chance of a 70% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. And because we're attacking so fast, the uptime on this is quite good. You could put vulnerable on your corpse generals, but then we lose that additional blood orb generation, which we don't want to do. We want maximum bone spirits. You also see some spirit wave built out there, scale imperfectly balanced. I think this is a bad choice. One, because you get more damage by scaling evulsion and by scaling amplified damage. But two, by scaling imperfectly balanced, you actually increase the core skill cost of your blood lance as well. Not that there will be any problems with keeping that cost up with Ring of Starless Skies, but there's zero reason to increase the cost of your core skills whatsoever. So I think it is actually a bad choice. You'll also notice we're going to have up to 41 points into Bone Spirit. Now, that's because one, you can fully masterwork in GA the Air Perdition to get +7 to core skills. Two, we can get up to +8 on our chest if we fully masterwork in GA a Bone Spirit charge on the Blood Arson Curious. We're going to get +7 if we hit a full masterwork GA on our core skills on gloves. And then lastly, on our boots, you can masterwork in fully GA Bone Spirit ranks to get another +8. And then of course, you can get up to +7 if you fully GA and masterwork Ring of Starless Skies. And so all said and done, you could actually get this bad boy up to 42 ranks of Bone Spirit, which is just insane. Bone Spirit gives 8% damage multiplier per rank, so that is just sheer beautiful damage. Moving on down to the ultimate part of the tree, we're going to put all points we can into Blood Wave. Now again, it's not that Blood Wave does bad damage. The damage is actually quite good, but we're not scaling blood damage at all. We're not really scaling physical damage all that much. So while this does do decent damage, we're not going to worry about scaling this damage whatsoever. The main damage dealer of this whole build will be Bone Spirit, but every rank into Blood Wave reduces its cooldown. So you'll notice at rank 1, its cooldown is 50 seconds, but if we go to rank 5, it's now 9 seconds shaved off, which just means more uptime on Blood Waves. Prime Blood Wave will give us 20% DR for 10 seconds after casting Blood Waves. So we'll have 100% uptime on this. 20% DR is just juicy. This build's actually quite tanky. And then most importantly, Supreme Blood Wave leaves behind 6 blood orbs as it travels. That combined with the tidal wave aspects gives us 2 additional waves. We'll get 18 blood orbs every cast of Blood Wave. And again, we'll be spamming Blood Waves. So the amount of blood waves we're consuming, or blood orbs we're consuming, is just absolutely insane. We're also going to be using Finality. You can deal 50% increased damage for 8 seconds after casting Ultimate Skill. We're spamming Blood Wave in this setup, so we're going to get 50% damage multiplier all the time. We're using Inspired Leader to get 12% base crit chance. We're going to be capping crit really easy on this setup using this in combination with our sacrifice bonuses. Speaking of sacrifice bonuses, we're using Memento Mori to increase the sacrifice bonuses of the Skeletal Warriors and the Skeletal Mages. The sacrifice bonuses are super good in this build, and we'll get into that in a minute when we talk about Book of the Dead. We're also going to be using Standalone to get a 18% additional damage reduction. But in the universe where you find you're surviving most of the damage, and again, this build does feel really tanky, you could rip those points out of Standalone, maybe get more points in the Transfusion. Or maybe if you're not feeling like you're keeping up Fortify enough, you could put more points in Drain Vitality. Maybe you're not keeping up Barrier Generation enough, you can put more points in the Chronic Fortitude. It's up to you, but we just kept the 18 point DR to keep the build silky smooth. And lastly, maybe most importantly, your Bone Skills deal 0.5 increased damage for each point of essence you have above 50 upon cast. The damage multi on this thing alone is just crazy. So maximum resource has value in this setup, and you'll see we put it on some of our pieces of gear and in the Paragon board. And speaking of those Book of the Dead sacrifice bonuses, we're giving 10% crit chance for sacrificing the skirmishers, which turns into 16% crit because of Memento Mori. We're sacrificing the cold mages to get 20% increased damage, multiplicative damage against vulnerable enemies. And again, everything will be vulnerable because of our ring and the lucky hit chance proc. And because of Memento Mori, that's actually a 32% damage multiplier. Most importantly, we're sacrificing the Iron Golem to get a 35% crit damage multiplier. And again, we're scaling insane amounts of crit strike damage. Not only regular crit strike damage, so we get between the Paragon board and all of our gear, we're sitting at 2,641, but we're also going to be scaling loads of bone crit strike damage across all of our gear. Insane amounts of crit strike damage multiplication happening here. Now, touching on all that gear, just like every video we've made about Vessel of Hatred so far, each piece of gear will have exactly 1 star for the sake of this video. Obviously, getting multiple greater affixes on gear is the dream, but we're going to show you 1 star per piece of gear because that's what we would recommend. You greater affix first, and then If we put 3 points into something, that's what I want you to masterwork. And sometimes those aren't the same. First up, the Air Perdition Helmet, which again is a new mythic helmet coming in Vessel of Hatred. This thing is just 90 ring crit strike chance, which is flat good, and a load of it, 29%. Lucky hit chance, again, is strong in the setup. Flat movement speed on the helmet is fantastic. This build does lack in movement speed just a little bit, but between the boots and this helmet, we're GG. And then again, Masterwork and fully GA, the core skills, you can get up to +7, which is +7 ranks to not only Bloodlance, which again doesn't really matter that much, but more importantly to Bone Spirit. For runes on the helmet, we like to use Zon Rune, which is 150 offering for casting ultimate skill. And again, we are spamming Blood Wave, so this gets triggered like crazy, and we're combining that with the Barbarian Enhanced Warcry, the Ohm Rune. After acquiring 500 offering, we get the Enhanced Warcry, which is a 35% damage multiplier on top of increased movement speed. Juicy, juicy. Now moving on to the chest, what this whole build revolves around is the Blood Artisan's Curious and its effect. When you pick up anywhere from 3 to 10, obviously you want to get this down to 3, but when you pick up 3 blood orbs, a free Bone Spirit is spawned, dealing bonus damage based on your current life percentage. Now notice that doesn't say life total, so having 20k life versus 8k life doesn't matter. It's just a matter of your current life percentage. So you want to make sure that you're always healed up to the top, but with the amount of blood orbs we're generating here and healing from, we will 100% life all the time, so we're getting that bonus 100% damage based on our current life percent. On top of the fact that you can GA plus Masterwork Bone Spirit ranks on the chest, which is fantastic. But the other most important stack here is Blood Essence Restore plus 12 Essence. This just makes sure that we keep our essence to tippy top. As far as the runes, again, we can only have up to 4 runes, but we like the Tam rune here. We're going to be spamming Bloodlance, 100% increased attack speed Bloodlance, so it's going to be popping off like crazy. And after we generate 500 offering, we're going to use the Yam rune, which basically evokes the Druid's Petrify, stunning enemies and increasing your critical strike damage against them. Again, we're scaling tons of critical strike damage here, so getting that additional critical strike damage multiplier is actually insane in this setup. By far the 4 best runes to use for this particular build. Moving on to the gloves, we're going to get a full GA and Masterwork core skill on gloves. An attack speed roll is super important here to hit that 100% attack speed bonus. And lastly, a little bit of max life. Again, max life isn't going to impact our Bone Spirit damage unless that we hit that 3% chance to overpower. Then it will actually impact. But other than that, is it a great defensive stat? Increasing our max life pool is pretty important in the late game. If you feel like your survivability is good enough here, you could definitely scale either lucky hit chance or of course put on even more critical strike damage if you wanted to. For the glove aspect, we're using the tidal wave aspect. It's super important. Your blood wave fires 2 additional waves, dealing 20% of its normal damage. But the most importantly is the 2 additional waves for the more blood orbs. For pants, just a normal pair of legendary pants. Ideally, the stats you're looking for here are max life, armor, and all res. Now, for the sake of min-maxing, you'll notice that I GA'd the max life, but we're really, with the pants, we're most concerned about reaching our armor cap of 1000 for Torment 4. So play around with this value if you need to GA the armor roll and fully masterwork that to hit your 1000 bonus. That's all that matters. But between this armor roll and the 21% armor we're going to get from tempering, plus the base armor on most of our gear, and maybe even a couple skulls in our jewelry, we'll be able to hit that 1000 armor cap, which is sorely needed for Torment 4. We're also going to spec into a little bit of Bone Spirit explosion size. This will just increase, obviously, the explosion radius of the Bone Spirit itself. Between this and the necklace, we're going to get 100% increased explosion size. So really a screen wide almost Bone Spirit explosion size. Between this and Corpse Tendrils, everything is going to get hit by your Bone Spirit. For the aspect, we're going to use the lucky hit. A damaging enemy has a 20% chance to daze them for 2 seconds. You deal 25% increased damage to dazed enemies. And again, we are scaling a bit of lucky here, so we're going to get a flat 25% increased damage multiplier to dazed enemies. This actually triggers quite a bit, an easy 25% damage multiplier. For the boots, we're going to run movement speed, but most importantly, Bone Spirit ranks. We're going to fully GA and masterwork that. Obviously, Bone Spirit is our main damage dealer. And then an int roll is also really great. 1, because it's more damage, but 2, it helps us reach our resistance cap. For tempering, like we said before, we're going to increase our Corpse Tendril size twice, once on the gloves and once on the boots, to get up to a 116 increased Corpse Tendril size. Again, this is so valuable because we're using the Blighted Corpse Tendrils, 30% chance to drop a blood orb when they damage enemies. So the more enemies it hits, because of its huge radius, the more chances we're going to get for some free blood orbs. And again, free blood orbs is good because of the chest. For the other temper, we're obviously going to use movement speed. Going back up to gloves, I think I forgot to mention, we're going to go temper bone critical strike damage and coarse tendril size. Again, bone critical strike damage has a huge damage multiplier here because we are scaling crit like crazy. For our weapon, couple options here. You could use a dagger because a dagger will fire off blood lances faster, theoretically increasing the chance of that 1 blood orb per 8 seconds. But since we're scaling so much critical strike damage here, I'm opting for the base crit strike damage of a sword, especially since the bone spirit doesn't care about our attack speed. Attack speed is only going to affect how fast we shoot up blood lances. For statting on the blade itself, more critical strike damage, more intelligence, more max life. I'm going to recommend you GA the intelligence roll because, again, it's going to help us reach our all-res cap. Plus, more int is more skill damage. And of course, we're going to fully masterwork the chance for bone spirit to deal double damage. That is super duper important. Between this and the offhand, we're getting 88% chance for bone spirit to deal double damage. That is massive, especially with the amount of bone spirits triggering in this build. And then of course, bone critical strike damage up to 145% at masterwork 12. Again, crit damage is crazy good with the setup. And then we're also going to socket a grand emerald for another 72% critical strike damage. So you're going to make sure your critical strike chance is 100%, which is no problem in this setup, but do make sure you're hitting that cap because we have so much damage based on our crit. Now, you're going to see a lot of builds out there, a lot of Spirit Waves variation that use the Doombringer. I don't like this choice. It does scale your life, but again, increased life pool does nothing for us. The Bone Artisan Curious doesn't get more damage based on your total life pool. It's only if you're at 100% life or 0% life. So I don't think the Doombringer has that added value here unless you really, really need the damage reduction. But again, I don't think you do. Between sacrificing your minions, the Blood Wave giving you 20% DR, and all the other ways we're getting DR in this setup, I just don't think the Doombringer is a good choice here at all. And you lose 44% chance for Bone Spirit to deal double damage. So don't be duped by all those Spirit Wave builds out there suggesting Doombringer. And again, we're using the new aspect, the phasing poltergeist, to get 3 additional bone spirits every single time it explodes, and it's exploding like crazy here. So more boom boom, 3 additional boom per cast, dealing 40% of that original damage. So that is super sick. Packs are going to blow up like crazy. Also, super vital piece of this whole puzzle is the legendary aspect, Fast Blood. Every single time we pick up a blood orb, which again is every millisecond here, our ultimate cooldown is reduced by 4.5 seconds, normally 3 seconds, but since we put it on our necklace, it's up to 4.5. This is what lets us spam blood waves nonstop. We're gonna GA an intelligence roll. Again, that is just so we can reach our resistance cap, and of course, intelligence is no slouch. It is a multiplier to our skill damage. We're going to fully masterwork Evulsion. Evulsion is a straight up huge damage bonus, 5% per point to vulnerable, for critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. So super juicy. We're gonna have at least 1 diamond in our gear, again, to help us reach that res cap of 70%. And then last, we're gonna use amplify damage, but you can really pick any damaging passive that works in favor of the bone spirit, but amplify damage is pretty easy to keep up. For tempering, more bone critical strike damage, no shock here. And of course, bone spirit explosion size. Moving on to one of the ring slots, just a normal legendary ring. On this, we're gonna fully GA and masterwork attack speed roll. This just helps us reach our 100% attack speed roll, our attack speed bonus on the build. Another super important stat here is that lucky chance to make enemies vulnerable. This is how we are making enemies vulnerable. Now, I do think, quick caveat here, I do think there's probably gonna be a companion in the Vessel of Hatred expansion that probably applies vulnerable. I assume that companions are going to work a lot like Season of Construct. They're just going to kind of fill a void that's maybe happening in your build. So if you don't have a great way of applying vulnerable, I do feel like probably one of the companions will do that for you. But we'll have to wait and see. So maybe we can drop this all together. But for now, until we know more about the companions, I still think that this is the best way to generate vulnerable for this setup. And then lastly, another int roll. Int is more damage and more all res. For tempering, we're going to hit 145% bone critical strike damage. I've already explained why that's so good. And then ultimate cooldown reduction, 14.5%, just because none of the other options are all that great. Getting the base cooldown reduction lowered on Blood Wave can't be a negative thing here. We're using Ring of Starless Skies. So spending your primary resource reduces the resource cost of your skills and increases your damage by up to 50% for 3 seconds. So we're spamming Blood Lance, so this effect is going to be up 100% of the time. And since it's flat damage, it affects the damage of our blood wave, and it affects the damage of our bone spirit. On top of having really amazing stats. Now we're going to try to GA the attack speed first, because just hitting the GA attack speed and master working this thing up to level 12, we're going to be at our attack speed cap of 100%. Now you're going to see here that we're at 84.4, which is short, but remember here, team, we're using the Blood Lance, which says if there are at least 2 targets or a boss affected by Blood Lance, you get 15% attack speed. So that takes us to 99.4 attack speed bonus. Yeah, easily achievable if you hit the GA there. If you don't hit the GA here, you can just fully still masterwork the core skills, maybe GA the core skills as well, and then you could just use the attack speed potion to get yourself up to the max. Just hitting the GA here is more than enough to get you there without the potion. For these 2 ring socks, we're going to put a grand skull in. That just helps us get that, again, 1000 armor score. The other stats on the ring of stars, guys, are amazing. Critical strike chance, lucky hit chance. Again, lucky hit chance is super good in this build. And then lastly, our offhand. Again, offhands in the expansion are nuts because they give a 40% lucky hit chance. So again, more lucky, yay. We are going to GA the max resource here. Again, max resource does impact how much damage the bone spirit does according to the ossified essence key passive. So this is an easy 31% increase or 31 max resource increase. Outside of that, we're going to get an int roll and a max life roll. Again, int and life, just good defensively. Another bone critical strike damage. Again, you're seeing the trend, lots and lots of crit damage. And most importantly, a fully masterworked chance for bone spirit to deal double damage. For the aspect here, we're going to do ossified essence key also increases the critical strike damage of your bone skills by 1% per essence above 50 up to 45%. So our max essence pool, I believe now max roll says my max essence is 159, but it definitely doesn't figure in unliving energy. So it's at least 168, which is that much more damage according to the ossified essence. And again, that is a crit damage multiplier. And since we're stacking so much crit damage, that value is nutty good. Moving on to the Paragon, do follow along in the build planner below. But we're just going to touch on the important pieces here. First up, for this particular setup, we like the exploit glyph. This is one of the stronger areas on the Paragon board to put a dex glyph node. Our vulnerable damage does get multiplied by our Book of the Dead. So having more additive vulnerable damage has good value here. Plus the additional 30.8% of multiplicative damage we get from making this thing legendary. We're going to also pick up the additive bonus to elite damage and regular damage, making sure to pick up the max life rolls. But most importantly, the all res nodes down here in the bottom left. Moving on to the bone graft board. Again, this is a bone spirit build, so the bone graft board is good. Hitting enemies with your bone skills increase your damage and your max essence by 2 for 8 seconds. Stacks up to 8% increased damage and 16 max essence. So that's another 16 essence on top of the 168. Happy days. This is the best dexterity board for this particular build. So we're going to, again, put the essence glyph here because that is our most important dex glyph and our most important additive stat because that is what we are multiplying the most. And this gives us 971.9 critical strike damage additive on top of some additional critical strike damage rolls additive here on the board and some bone damage below. Another important area of the board here is getting this max essence. All these essence nodes, essence on kill nodes, keeps your essence pool topped off. Getting some flat armor rolls and damage reduction from vulnerable enemies right here in the middle. And of course, some all res nodes here on the left. Moving into the blood begets blood. Again, we're using the blood lance assets that auto consumes blood orbs every single time we use blood ants. So this will have 100% uptime, a 50% flat damage multiplier, and possibly the best way to keep up blood begets blood of any build on the Necro. You do not have to manually go around and pick up orbs, which is fantastic. That's what I love about Bloodlance the most. On this board, I like Undaunted. Undaunted gives us 10% damage reduction. The more fortified we have, we'll be fortified 100% of the time. So this is a flat 10% DR. And then while we're healthy, we get 24.8 damage multiplier according to that legendary bonus. Now, again, we heal so much in this build, and that is so important because the Blood Arsen's curious. So we want to be topped off all the time anyways. So keeping ourselves healthy is always objective one. So we're going to have this up all of the time. On top of hitting a little bit more additive damage in this build, you can hit some max life at the top and that tier at the bottom until moving into Frailty. Frailty is the new Paragon board in Vessel of Hatred. This makes it so enemies take up to 40% damage if they're cursed, and that damage increases by 10% every second. So as long as they're cursed for 4 seconds, they're and get that 40% damage multiplier. For this board, I'm going to go ahead and use the Eliminator. The Eliminator is the new glyph coming in the Vessel of Hatred. It basically gives us a 624% bonus to all normal nodes. So it makes nodes that have main stat like this super valuable. At glyph level 100, you get 36 main stat or 36 whatever stat, depending on what you pick, which can make some of these nodes super useful to pick if you need, say, more crit. You can pick some dexterity nodes. If you see more armor, you can pick up some strength nodes. So do play with that. But most importantly, with Eliminator, we get a 38.5 increased damage to elites multiplier, which is just nutty. The most damage multiplier of any single glyph. But importantly on this board, you're going to pick up all of these attack speed and life nodes down here, some armor and damage to crowd control additive down here, and some more max life down here. Lastly, not crazy about this option of choice, but we're going to be using the Scent of Death. This will basically give us 15% damage reduction throughout the entire pit or rift, whatever you want to call it. And then on bosses, since we're not putting a single point in the Hued Flesh, a lot of builds are going to recommend you put 1 point in the Hued Flesh. I don't agree. I don't want any corpses against the boss. Most bosses don't have ads, so most of the time you're going to get a 15% damage multiplier from Scent of Death. However, there are some bosses that do spawn ads and you don't have any way of using corpses, so you're just going to get that fat 15% damage mitigation, but ideally no corpses on the ground, so 50% damage multiplier. For this board, we like control. We get 95 points into intelligence, which gives us a whopping 782% additive damage to crowd controlled enemies, and our enemies are crowd controlled because of we're using the curse aura, so enemies, anything caught by a decrepify will be slowed, so that is a crowd control effect. But we're also using the daze effect, so if they are dazed, they also get that crowd control bonus. The other important parts of the board, getting damaged, injured, but more importantly armor, more armor down here as well as damage reduction to vulnerable enemies, and everything's vulnerable, so that is just flat good. A little bit of max life down here in the bottom. Last but not least, probably the lowest priority is just a little bit more additive crit strike damage down here at the bottom. For skill rotation, I'm actually just going to walk you through some more of the gameplay that we recorded on PTR. But basically, you're just going to be spamming Blood Lance as fast as humanly possible, and also spamming Blood Wave off cooldown. You're going to notice that the cooldown comes back so fast because we're getting those blood orbs. We'll also be wanting to spam Corpse Tendrils off cooldown. Again, Corpse Tendrils range is going to be huge because of that 100% increased radius. And again, everything that hits by Corpse Tendrils is going to get a blood orb. So getting those easy free blood orbs is super great. So again, literally just spamming your ultimate and then just spamming Blood Lance is your only priority here. You want to make sure mobs stay cursed, so you can either get in close range to proc your curse aura, or you can just manually cast a curse at range. And of course we have Blight on the bar. You probably want to just use that on bosses or stuff that's really, really tanky. But that's pretty much going to do it for this video guide. Let me know in the comment below what you guys think of the build. Again, if the build changes at all, if something gets buffed, if something gets nerfed, I will keep the planner down below up to date, so do check that often, especially before Vessel of Hatred comes out. And again, assuming nothing changes from now to PTR, this will be the strongest build for the Necromancer going into the next season. This will certainly be one of the best uber killers and one of the best high level pit tier farmers, but hopefully this gets some of you guys hype for the upcoming Vessel of Hatred expansion. As always guys, like, subscribe, come over to Twitch, ask your questions. We love you guys. Peace out.